Delegations from Russia and Ukraine held face-to-face talks in Abu Dhabi this week in an effort to end nearly 4 years of fighting. The two sides agreed to a prisoner swap, but sticking points remain over the territory in eastern Ukraine and security guarantees. We'll have more on the talks later in the show, but we begin with renowned historian Alfred McCoy. He is a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His latest book is called Cold War on 5 Continents, A Global History of Empire and Espionage. Dr. McCoy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alan.
Dr. McCoy, in your newest book, Cold War on 5 Continents, you describe the United States as an empire in decline. What's led you to that view?
The signs are manifest. You can see them domestically. Every empire in decline over the last 50 or 60 years has suffered a coup in which the disgruntled forces challenged the constitutional order. We had our coup on January 6, 2001. We've seen the emergence of a thundering populist calling for a reassertion of American dominance, American greatness. That's also a manifestation of American decline. But we're seeing more specifically in the Trump administration a series of political decisions that are accelerating a natural decline. Look, the United States has been the most powerful empire in the history of humanity for the past 80 years. And every empire has its ascent, and every empire inevitably has its decline. And we are on that long trajectory of decline. We've been that way since about 2002. And because we're such a powerful global hegemon, deeply embedded in the world system, our decline is longer and more complex than previous imperial declines, but it's ongoing. And the policies of the Trump administration are accelerating, unimaginable at pace, this process of decline. The first thing the Trump administration has done is it has broken the iron laws of geopolitics that were critical for the U.S. victory during the Cold War and were critical for the U.S. dominance of the world system in the decades after the Cold War. And that's very simple this. For the past 1,000 years, every would-be global hegemon has had to contest for control over the vast Eurasian landmass. Eurasia is home today to 70% of the world's population and productivity. That's 70%. 7 out of every 10 humans on the planet lives in Eurasia. Okay, so if you are going to be a world power, you have to be a power on the Eurasian landmass. The United States during the Cold War understood this. We were very careful to control what are called the axial ends of Eurasia. The NATO alliance gave us a perch on the west, and then we had 5 bilateral mutual defense pacts down the Pacific littoral from Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, all the way to Australia. And that gave us a perch on the eastern axial end of Eurasia. And from that, we were able to lay some rings of steel around that Eurasian landmass that isolated the Sino-Soviet bloc behind the Iron Curtain. And with them isolated, we just sat back and waited for them to collapse from within, in the case of the Soviet Union, and to make bad geopolitical decisions, the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and then the Soviet Union fall apart, and America won the Cold War, basically by doing very little other than maintaining that geopolitical position on the Eurasian landmass. And what President Trump has done, and he's been very explicit, you can see it in the November last year, the National Security Strategy, is he's saying the United States is withdrawing from the world, and we are going to become the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. We're going to concentrate our forces. Trump has a kind of like what I call a tricontinental strategy. This is something I explain in my book. Basically, Putin and Russia dominate the old Soviet sphere. China is allowed to dominate its periphery in East Asia, and we are correspondingly dominant in the Americas, okay? Which means that we are unilaterally surrendering. We're withdrawing in this new Cold War contestation for dominance over the Eurasian landmass. It is bizarre. And also, you know, President Trump is known to be very hostile toward NATO, and his recent grab for Greenland has really roiled the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and I don't think it's ever going to be quite the same again.
Al, I want to turn to what we call the global order, sometimes known as the rules-based order, or the whole concept of international law. You say about President Trump from the first day of his second term in office in January 2025, he set out to tear down the US-led global order and transform America's place in the world. And of course, this global order, it depends and relies on a very tenuous agreement between countries, things like the recognition of national sovereignty, of national borders, the primacy of resolutions that are undertaken by the United Nations. But when you say that, he's tearing down this global order, what is he doing, and how does it fit in with his idea of what he calls America First?
Sure. First of all, the global order has two things. One, as you said, it's a kind of informal understanding. It's the rules of the game. And all rules have two things. One, the formal written rules and the understanding among the players, okay? Now, the written rules are clear. When the United States led the world in drafting a charter for the United Nations at San Francisco in 1945, there are two core principles enshrined in the UN Charter. One, the idea that all human beings have inalienable human rights, okay? And second, all those human beings have the right to live in their own nation. And that nation, or those nations, have inviolable sovereignty. No other nation is allowed to transgress the borders, the sovereignty of another nation. Nations gave up the right to territorial expansion by force of arms. Those were the two principles that in all of those thousands of words in the UN Charter, those are the core principles. So it does have, in fact, a specific reality written down in that UN Charter. And Trump has effectively set that aside. I mean, first of all, he's in the process of trying to create his own international order, with his own rules-based system that he's announced. And second, he's transgressed both the written idea of non-violation of sovereignty by the claim to Greenland, and he's violated the unwritten rules that nations don't use threats of military force to advance territorial claims. And that has done incalculable damage to the global order. Now, basically, it's coincident with what I talked about earlier. It's coincident with Trump's tricontinental strategy. He doesn't see a world of which there are 192 nations, all represented in the General Assembly of the United Nations, all with an equal vote. No, he sees a world of great powers, and he sees three great powers with three spheres of influence. Russia dominating the old Soviet sphere, China dominant in East Asia, and the United States absolutely dominant in the Americas, with the right in the Americas, within its sphere, to exercise its power as it sees fit without any attention to either the unwritten rules of the game or the formal rules in the United Nations. And so at multiple levels, this is a transformation, a major rupture in the global order.
President Trump has also shown a contempt for international law. He doesn't believe that he or the United States should be held accountable for what it does around the world. And to be clear, he's not the only one. We saw that with the previous Biden administration as well, and we see that with European leaders, with Israeli leaders as well, this complete disregard for what we call the rules-based order and for humanitarian and human rights law as well. And this has left a huge international vacuum on how these international laws are applied, how they are enforced in many ways. What impact is this having?
Well, I think the most visible impact it's having is in the realm of trade. All right, when the United States presided over the construction of the United Nations in 1945, simultaneous with that, we also had the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. And we created the International Economic Order, which had three key components. One, the International Monetary Fund, which regulates essentially currency transactions around the world. We had the World Bank, which was supposed to preside over the development of less developed nations. And the third, we had a third arena, which was the it was called the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which today is the World Trade Organization and sets up rules for international trade. So essentially, this regulated international affairs. It regulated currency transactions, it regulated trade relations, and as a result, the average duties internationally among major trading partners went down from about 22% in 1945-46 to about 2% when Trump came into office. That was all the way down to 2%. So we essentially had a world of free trade based upon regulations, and Trump has, with his tariffs, is absolutely shredded, that key component of the international order. Now, Trump and his acolytes claim that this is an assertion of American sovereignty, that this will bring back prosperity to America, bring back manufacturing to America, that we're going to be paying up front. There'll be some disruption, but medium term, just over the horizon is economic prosperity. And I think this is fundamentally wrong. Look, when this international order was created back in 1945, the United States was between 50 to 60% of the world economy right after World War II. I mean, the major industrial nations, Europe and Japan, Russia, were devastated. We were the last economic power standing, and we had 6% of the world's population and about 50 to 60% of the world's economic productivity. We were an economic titan. If you wanted to trade, if you wanted development, you had to deal with America. Well, we've presided over a very lively, very productive world economy since 1945, and the United States is down to about 20% of world trade, 20% of world productivity. That leaves 80% of the world. And so as America becomes erratic and kind of irresponsible and violates all these rules that America created, the world is now starting to trade with themselves, with, Canada's gone to China, Britain is going to China. There's 80% of the world economy out there, and the world is starting, and you can see all these bilateral and multilateral pacts are just popping up, leaving the United States aside. And so we are going to be left behind in the world economy. And once you add it up, the geopolitical bungling, the mismanagement of energy policy, and this absolutely bizarre, totally ignorant inability to grasp that we are in the midst of an energy revolution. It would be as if the United States decided that when Britain was developing steam engines that we were going to breed more horses.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond belief. Okay, so you add up these three things: the geopolitical miscalculation, the bad energy policy, and then this egocentric trade regime and the trashing of the global trade order. And you add them all up, and what you see is medium-term trajectory, an accelerating U.S. decline.
Dr. Alfred McCoy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We turn now to the U.S. brokered talks in Abu Dhabi between Russia and Ukraine. The delegations agreed to exchange 314 prisoners and described the talks as the most substantive engagement in months. Joining us now from Moscow is Andrey Kortunov. He is an expert at the Valdai Club, former Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Andrey Kortunov, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
The chief Russian negotiator at those U.S. brokered talks that are taking place or have taken place in Abu Dhabi, Kirill Dmitriev, he told state media in Russia that, and I'm quoting him here, things are moving forward in a good, positive direction, unquote. As I said, the talks have ended. There's been agreement on a prisoner swap. But what do you believe is behind Dmitriev's optimistic outlook on these talks?
Well, I think that we can conclude that the prisoner swap was not the only subject they discussed there, because prisoner swap is more or less standard. There were many swaps in the past, and I think that definitely the delegations in Abu Dhabi went beyond this issue. Allegedly, they also discussed the territorial issue, which is, of course, is one of the most divisive issues between Russia and Ukraine. And also, the rumor is that they focused on the ceasefire mechanisms. And that might sound rather technical, but it is still very important because it is not easy to stop a conflict like that, even technically. There are issues about monitoring the ceasefire, about potential breaches of ceasefire, about escalation, maybe inadvertent escalation. So definitely they should have discussed these issues at some length.
So, Andrey, when you say they're talking about the mechanisms of the ceasefire and how to monitor that and how to enforce that, does that mean that the lines will remain where they are right now? It will be frozen where they are?
Well, I think it would be premature to say that the lines will stay as they are right now, because, of course, we should observe the dynamics of the conflict. If the conflict stops tomorrow, then the odds are the lines will be where they are right now. But I can imagine that both sides expect to get some territorial gains before the ceasefire. Russia is advancing, but Ukraine is trying to start some kind of counteroffensives. So my personal take is that it is very likely that Russia will get all the territory of Donbass within the next couple of months if the conflict is not stopped earlier.
So this is a big difference between the two sides, the territorial issue, because Russia has made those demands on the territory that it wants to take control of. It even wants to take control of a part of Donetsk that it doesn't control right now, and the Ukrainians have been constantly saying that that's not going to happen. So what is the middle ground here?
Well, there is something like 2,000 square miles that are still under the Ukrainian control in the Donetsk region. Given the pace of the Russian offensive, it will probably take the Russian armed forces another 5 or 7 months to get all the territory of Donetsk. But there might be other arrangements. For instance, Russia controls some pieces of land outside of the Donetsk region, like in Kharkiv or in Sumy or in Dnipro regions. And there might be a land swap if there is a political will on both sides to go for a land swap.
What is behind these attacks that Russia has been making on Ukraine that we've had over the past few weeks? I mean, we have these barrage of rockets, missiles, drone attacks from Russia against Ukraine. They've targeted the capital, Kyiv. They've targeted Ukrainian energy infrastructure as well. What's the Russian strategy here?
Well, I think that the Russian strategy is to deprive Ukraine of the capabilities to resist. And by targeting the energy infrastructure of the country, Russia is clearly trying to break the will of the Ukrainian armed forces and of the Ukrainian political leadership. I think it's painful. Of course, Ukraine also hits the Russian energy infrastructure, and Russia has to suffer as well. But in relative terms, probably Ukraine suffers more than Russia does, at least at this particular point.
The Ukrainians say that if they were to make the kind of territorial compromises that Russia is talking about, even limited compromises, then they would require security guarantees. What kinds of security guarantees would be acceptable to Russia if Ukraine gets those?
Well, as far as I understand the Russian position, they would argue that security guarantees should be comprehensive. They should include not only Ukraine, but Russia as well, because if Russia feels insecure, if there are concerns about irredentism or revanchism from the Ukrainian side, there'll be no stability or peace in Europe. Therefore, there should be an arrangement that would allow both nations to feel secure and to focus on their domestic development challenges. That implies that, for instance, Russia is very unhappy about the prospect, any prospect of NATO troops stationed in Ukraine, because that will be perceived as a kind of existential challenge to Russia's national security.
Andrey Kortunov, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Russia targeted Ukraine's energy grid this week with drone and missile strikes, causing power outages in Kyiv and other major cities. The country is facing one of the coldest winters on record. Joining us now from Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev. He's the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Peter, great to see you. What are conditions like right now in Kyiv where you are? You know, as we've been reporting, the city's been hit with a barrage of missiles, rockets, drones from Russia targeting energy infrastructure, and this coming in the midst of a very, very severe winter.
And precisely, Vladimir Putin chose this moment to finish his apparent gentlemanly agreement of an energy ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine that he apparently negotiated with Donald Trump just on the day, on the night where the weather really turned brutally cold, the coldest step we've had in Ukraine in many, many years. And of course, the enemy has been targeting precisely the city of Kyiv, of the pre-war level of 4 million people. We were still talking about at least 2.5 million who's still living there. These bombardments have necessitated the outflow of hundreds of thousands of residents of the city. And if this keeps up, I'm afraid that we will be talking about at least a partial evacuation of the city. This plays into Vladimir Putin's hands. He knows that this creates not just pressure on President Zelensky, it could lead to a chaos in the capital, and it also would increase pressure on Ukraine's Western allies. If we're talking about hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian refugees spilling over the border of Western Europe, that could propel more anti-immigrant right-wing parties to power in these countries. And that's exactly what Vladimir Putin wants.
Now, there are peace talks taking place, or have taken place. These are talks that were brokered by the United States, three-way talks taking place in Abu Dhabi. What we do know is that the one thing that was achieved is that there is a prisoner swap agreement. That prisoner swap is already underway. But what do you make of the talks that are taking place? And I mean, if you look at this prisoner swap, does it give you any feeling of optimism that there could be a broader agreement soon?
Well, first of all, of course, you have to be heartless not to welcome any of these, any prisoner exchanges, whether they lead to anything greater or not. It's another matter. But of course, you have to have experienced being captured and spending time in captivity in enemy territory to appreciate being at liberty, and of course the families, etc. So we cannot but welcome this. But whether that leads to any greater progress, so far what I've seen is Vladimir Putin has done everything that he can up till now to keep Donald Trump placated, to keep him from another round of hard sanctions or giving, God forbid, giving Ukraine tomahawks. And this is something that some of the U.S. senators from the Republican Party close to President Trump are already urging him to do. Of course, the Russians want to avoid that scenario. But at the same time, I don't think they're ready yet on the conditions that are currently presented to them to sit down and sign a peace agreement. Of course, the territorial issue remains the big sticking point for Vladimir Putin. So he looks at it, he feels that time is not right for that. He thinks that he can get more out of Ukraine if he keeps up the bombardments of civilian areas. And of course, he's also slowly pressing his advantage in the battlefield. So right now, I would have very skeptical about an immediate prospect of peace.
Yeah. You know, if you look at the situation right now, the two sides, Ukraine on one side, Russia on the other side, have broadly divergent positions on what they want. On the one side, Russia wants Ukraine to give up a large part of its territory, almost a fifth of the country. On the other side, Ukraine says, no way, there's no land for peace in this deal. Ukraine's proposing alternatives, things like demilitarization and security guarantees as well. This is a huge divide. But do you see any way, any compromise where this divide could be bridged?
I think the territorial issue actually is a red herring for both sides. I think for Vladimir Putin, the slice of the Donbass that he still hasn't controlled is immaterial, right? I think he wants more, and I think he wants to, win some, time with this, I think he also believes that if he commands this territory, he can continue attacking Ukraine from there, from Kramatorsk, from Slaviansk. Some of those towns are essential garrisons, they're fortress towns, and they offer an advantageous position to whoever controls them, of course. And for Ukraine, it's also a red herring in the sense that it's not just the territory of the Donbass. Those security guarantees that would keep us at peace and secure in our future. I mean, so far, that the American side hasn't provided clear security guarantees what they will be. All we have had up till now is a no to NATO. We've had to agree to that. In what will replace that? We don't know that.
Right. There was an interview that President Zelensky did with a French television network, and in that interview, he expressed a lot of skepticism, a lot of doubt about the support of the United States in this conflict. It would appear that he's lost confidence in the United States to broker some kind of deal. I mean, is he correct in this?
Well, how could you not, right? If you look at our allies, look at the Danes, look at the French, look at the British after Donald Trump's Greenland demand, which he actually walked down in Davos. That I think meant that the very idea of NATO and collective security of NATO is now under great threat, is under big question right now. So how can you blame the Ukrainian president for losing faith in America as a credible guarantor of security when America's own NATO partners no longer can trust Donald Trump and feel that the pressure now on the continent is on both sides, right? Across the Atlantic from Washington and to the east from Moscow.
Peter Zalmayev, we have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.